All right, good evening, and thank you for listening to episode 3 here of the Grim Wisdom Podcast. The idea is we're going to give you some wisdom, and it's going to be unpleasant. With me is Sean Hawley this week, but I know it's the same guest we had last week, but this week he's drinking, so hopefully it'll be, it'll be a little different. Yeah.
It'll be more exciting.
I work nights, so I'm all hopped up on caffeine so I can stay awake all night, and he's, drinking Bailey's Irish cream. Maybe I should toss some of that in my coffee.
Go for it. It's pretty good.
Okay, I'm going to do that. You talk for a little bit while I get the coffee.
I was actually thinking, as you were doing the intro here, you need to get yourself an intro theme song. You got to find something, probably something from your repertoire of rock or metal. Just to kind of like go along with the whole the grim theme behind it. Everybody's got an intro theme song these days, man. You got to go with that.
Yeah, I was thinking "You're Gonna Die" by William Shatner, but
yeah, that might work. Yeah, actually, that might be perfect. There you go. Let's work that in somehow. I think.
All right. Well, I'll see if I can get the licensing because YouTube's a bitch about that.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
I'll write an email to Billy Shatner and I'll say, "Hey, I got a podcast. Like 5 people listen to it. Can I put your song on it because you impress me?"
Yeah.
And his lawyers would say no because lawyers are dicks. But I'm sure. Why would Billy Shatner care about that? It's free exposure.
I don't know. I mean, don't know till you try. Right?
Yeah. So anyway, Billy Shatner in this case being my affectionate term for William Shatner. Captain Kirk.
They're on first name basis.
Yeah. We're homies. We're bros. So because loving a thing makes it yours. So anyway, I don't mean that. I was being sarcastic. You can't tell I was rolling my eyes when I said that. So moving on.
The YouTube portion of this is yet to come.
Right.
Or the video YouTube portion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know that you honestly would find your life enhanced by looking at us as we do this because,
it might,
honestly...
might be a good, comic relief for the week.
I mean, I think their stomachs are going to be turned enough just listening to me without having to look at me too, but...
Eventually.
All right, so maybe I put too much...
No, well, there's no going back now, man.
Oh, yeah, that's some serious business. All right.
That's good.
Yeah, so I'm going to get... we're going to do some drinking tonight while we talk.
Those usually make the best podcasts anyway.
I think, honestly, we'll be done with the podcast by the time it really starts to take effect, but I guess we'll find out.
So next week's episode, the guest will be Jack Daniels. And he'll join the party
and his partner, Jimmy Reeve. Yeah, so... I was going to invite somebody new this week, but I wanted to get it done here on Monday, so we'll have another week to try to recruit a fresh voice for the podcast here. So, getting to the point, approaching the point in a circuitous way, which is how we all approach all points here on the Grim Wisdom Podcast. Let's start by the Republican primary. So, people have been asking us to talk about the presidential debate, and I think that I have figured out the secret to the Republican primary. Donald Trump is just trolling America. He is a troll. If you don't know what an internet troll is...
Wikipedia.
Yeah, Wikipedia. If you don't know what an internet troll is, use the internet. And if you don't have the internet, why are you listening to this podcast?
How are you even listening to us?
So, to elaborate, basically... if you look at his behavior, he'll say things that are just obvious lies. He'll incite violence. The big news from this last week was he was going to have this rally in Chicago, and a bunch of protesters were like, "Well, we're going to go to the rally and disrupt it," right? And the Chicago police said, "Hey, we've got all these weapons. We're like champing at the bit. We will beat all of these brown people's asses for you. There's no problem at all with your rally. And if any protesters fuck it up, we will kill them, arrest them, beat them into submission, or otherwise cow them with our massive military force." And Donald Trump said, "Nah, no thanks. It would have been a great rally. I would have been amazing, but I'm just not gonna do it." Right?
Opt out of this one.
Right. And so then. He gets another news cycle out of this crazy drama. So if you think about it, why would you, if you're a political figure looking to raise your exposure, get your message out, why would you not have a rally if the cops say they can provide security? I mean, in this case, of course, that's what they said. They said they could provide security. All that stuff I just said about, beating up brown people, that's just hyperbole. But
That's just what we call Grant Metz embellishment. There.
Yeah, that's embellishment. Although I'm sure that that's the subtext also of what they were saying, is that we have more than enough force to counter these unruly black people, because that's the large majority of the protesters were black people. So but the issue is he got another news cycle out of this. Everybody was talking about this rally that he was going to have and the violence that would have happened, and what does this mean for America, and everybody keeps talking about him on and on and on, and he's just sitting at home with this gigantic throbbing erection because people keep talking about him. And I think that's really his only goal, is to get people's attention. I mean, we also saw on the Daily Show last week, I don't think Sean saw it, but I was telling him about it, where they debunked all of Trump's claims to business, and he was standing in front of a table full of Trump products that were all farcical and that didn't exist. And yeah, I mean, they debunked it. It's all lies. But what I find disturbing is everybody keeps talking about this because we know that Trump lies. I mean, that's just this thing, right? So why do we even need further confirmation of it at this point? Well, I think that he's just, like all internet trolls, sometimes if there's a really good trolling, at first you don't realize you're being trolled, and then you engage with the troll, and then they get more and more trolly, and then you start to wonder, and then there comes the moment where you realize, okay, I'm definitely being trolled, and I'm going to disengage from this conversation. But sometimes, just for, well, I would say shits and giggles, but you're not allowed to say shit because people can't handle profanity, so just for poops and giggles, you might go back and look at the comment thread, and there's still the person is continuing to troll because there are people that haven't yet figured out that they're dealing with a troll, and so it's going on and on. And I think really that's what's happening here, is that once you figure out that he's trolling and you just tone him out, then it's easy. But no matter how outrageous his claims, no matter how blatantly he seems to just be trolling, people still keep giving him news attention, I guess anything rather than talk about Bernie Sanders, right?
Well, I mean, like you say, I mean, it seems that that's likely just his design. Most people that use the internet frequently, which would probably be a lot of people listening to a podcast like this, have experienced internet trolls. I mean, I think, the days of forum posting are kind of behind us a little bit, but that was where it really blossomed, and it was a great example of how this phenomenon occurs. And I mean, it is amazing. Once the troll starts the riot, it just takes on a life of its own, mm-hmm. And it actually is. I mean, I didn't think of it until you said it, but it's a beautiful representation of that on a national level in the presidential campaign. That's exciting.
I mean, it's pretty amazing. I mean, if he would only use his powers for good instead of evil, right?
I mean, what fun would that be?
Well said. And it's interesting because I think you and I, I think it was maybe even 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, we had this conversation about how trolling is this phenomenon that predates the internet. They didn't call it trolling back then, of course, but it's this expression of a human desire that has found its outlet in other forms, but the internet uniquely is given this desire to gain attention through being outrageous and offensive
and anonymous.
It's given it that.
I mean, that's what the internet. But I mean, the amazing thing about Donald Trump is he's just doing it publicly with his own face.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you can call that a horror show, his face, but
it's not his hair. Well, that we know for sure.
Yes, but yeah, it is interesting. If you inherit $300 million from your daddy and you just want people to pay attention to you, you can get that to happen. And Donald Trump says he loves the poorly educated. Well, of course he does, because they're the ones who figure out last that they're being trolled, right? So at some point, I think that these legions of uneducated, ignorant Trump voters will figure out that they're being trolled and they'll get pissed. But that's sort of their default state anyway, right? It must suck to be poorly educated because you just don't understand the world.
So ultimately, what Donald Trump is doing is just taking a page out of the playbook of the Kardashians. Next up for Donald Trump is a sex tape.
Yep. I think there is one already.
Oh, is there already a sex tape? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm out of it.
But he'll probably be posting nude selfies before long. So All right, so we can dispense with that, and let's move on to the second most likely Republican nominee, which is this guy Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz last week said something so ridiculous that in any other universe it would have garnered more attention, but Trump is just sucking all the oxygen out of the room. Ted Cruz said that, oh, Trump is a divider and he wants to divide America, and I want to become a president who's going to unify America. And if anyone has no place to talk about uniting America, it's Ted flippin' Cruz, because I mean that guy's record in the Senate. I mean, he has hijacked so much of their activities, even from the Senate Majority Leader, because he is so conservative and he's like the darling of these Tea Party wackos. And boy, if anything had Obama's name on it, he was against it. Anything he could do to divide America against the scary black president, he did it. And, you know, he'd stop at nothing to get on TV and divide America. So to hear him saying that Ted Cruz, that Troll Boy is too divisive and that he wants to unify America, well, it's like sort of a shocking example of deception. You know, I mean, it's a more. It doesn't really matter if Troll Boy made any money on his airline or not. Like, it doesn't really, in some analysis, doesn't really directly affect his ability to be president anyway. But tell a lie like that you want to be a uniter, not a divider. I mean, that's like Kim Jong-un saying he wants to be a uniter, not a divider. He's going to kill anyone who disagrees with him. Well, that'll unify people, right?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of unifier that Ted Cruz wants to be. It's like George W. Bush, who can say he wants to be a uniter, not a divider, and at the same time say the best form of government is a dictatorship as long as I'm a dictator.
Well, he just wants to unify his party of people. Everybody else is not really important.
I want to unify the country under my benevolent rule forever. So yeah, that was pretty crazy. Any thoughts on that, Sean?
No, not specifically. I don't have enough info on Ted Cruz right now. It is interesting that we talk about this because I was just recently reading a book which is probably fairly relevant to the presidential campaign. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called 48 Laws of Power.
No, I never heard of it.
No. Well, it's interesting. It's your kind of book. You should read it. You know, the position it takes is it's a position of understanding human dynamics and the power structure and the social power structure up to, it does a lot of analyses of, old, kings and courts and whatnot,
right.
Monarchies and whatnot.
Inbred tyrants as well.
Yeah. I mean, and how those power structures are maintained. And, and the interesting about that is the whole book comes from the standpoint of, using the power structure to manipulatively get your way at all times. It makes no bones about trying to be humane or benevolent about it in any way. So it's interesting. Like I say, you should read it. I think it probably ties in really well with some of the political tactics I think that we have these days.
Well, I want to go back and read The Prince, which is the name of the Machiavelli book that everybody knows about. But nobody knows the name of it, right? Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, Machiavelli, he wrote this crazy shit. But, sorry, I swore again. But nobody remembers the book that he wrote it in. I tried to read it at one point. It's very dry. I found it to be even drier than The Art of War, and that's saying something, because The Art of War, it's a great book. Like, everyone should probably read Sun Tzu's The Art of War, but it's very dry.
It's a slog to get through.
Yeah.
Though. I mean, the language in it is, I think I only got through about 2/3 of it.
Well, I mean, it's like, first of all, it's anachronistic, because it's so old, and second of all, it's also translated from a very different tongue.
Right.
But, I mean, I don't think there's any question that there's profound wisdom in there. It's just a slog to get through. And Machiavelli is more contemporary, and Italian is closer to English, so you would think it would be more accessible, but it's just so dry. It was really, I don't know if his target audience was sociopaths. There doesn't seem to be any suggestion that he was a sociopath, but more that a lot of his buddies were. Anyway, this is getting far afield.
Yes, no, that was the only tie-in I had to the political campaign, so I figured I'd throw it in there.
Well, it is interesting because I think that you're right. That's the way to analyze these people that's most illuminating. Even on the Democratic side, which we're going to get to in a moment, I think you can learn a lot by just analyzing people as if they were interested solely in their own selfish advancement, and that every position they took
Right.
had that aim in mind.
Was just an aim to gain a position of power over those around them, and obviously over, in this case, the country in general. But.
Right, and that might or might not be true, but I think there are insights that you can glean from that analysis about Clinton's candidacy, about Sanders' candidacy.
Oh, I mean, actually reading it though, I don't think that very many people, when you're internally thinking about your goals of achieving, of maintaining and gaining power, it kind of clearly lays out how many people do things that aren't necessarily malicious in their own intent, but they certainly are. The goal is to achieve, power over people around them. It's just that the author is very, he's not apologetic about what his analysis is trying to uncover. However, people themselves might not necessarily have malicious intent when they're trying to actually gain power. Whether or not, like I say, whether or not a political candidate, although, a case could be made.
Well, you can't see me over there on the podcast, but I am nodding
Yes.
in agreement with Sean. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about the Democratic primary for a while. It's kind of repulsive how after Bernie, and I think probably you're aware of this, Sean. So in Michigan, all the polls showed a landslide for Clinton. Like, the combined polling average showed Clinton up something like 15 points in Michigan. I mean, she was just dominant.
It was hard to miss the Michigan headlines. So
yeah, I mean, it was hard to miss because it was so flippin' newsworthy that even the media couldn't suppress it. I mean, it's like Dewey wins. You've seen that old picture of, I think it was FDR holding up Dewey wins. Yeah, it's like Dewey wins kind of thing. And you think in the modern world we've gotten polling technology up better, but we don't at all, clearly. So so you would think that would be more newsworthy, but that wasn't even like a full news cycle. That was one day, and then the next day it was right. So who should Clinton pick as her VP? As if the nomination was already decided, which I think is very premature and kind of offensive, honestly. There was a great unpacking of the Univision debate, which Sean and I were talking about debates a moment ago, but I'm just going to give you this nugget before we relay to you that conversation. There was this analysis of the Univision debate where Hillary went. I think it said that Hillary talked 38% more than Sanders, but more importantly, the moderator interrupted Sanders 150% more than they interrupted Hillary, which is really kind of outrageous. I mean, I want to watch that debate and see it. I don't think even any Hillary booster could really defend that as fair coverage, but the problem is the Sanders campaign just can't be seen talking too much about process, because it sounds like you're whining, even if you're not. Even if you're saying, Debbie Wasserman Schultz won't let us debate, and all the debates are held on flipping Sunday nights when nobody's watching. You can talk about that, and that's all true. But if Bernie talks about that, he just sounds like a sore loser, because in capitalism we have this idea, oh yeah, you were born to a poor parent, whatever, quit your whining and get a job, right? And as twisted as that is, and as unfair as that is, that's just sort of the narrative that our culture has. So it'll be interesting to see if that continues indefinitely, or if there'll be any change if Bernie wins these states that he's not supposed to, because he's also not supposed to win Ohio, and he's not supposed to win Florida, and there's all these important states coming up in the next few weeks that he's not supposed to win. And if he wins any or all of them, it'll be interesting to see if it does the same thing again, where we hear about it for one day and then it goes back to, so who should Clinton pick as her VP? What's Clinton's biggest weakness in the general election? Blah blah blah, like it's already decided or something. So
well, even if Bernie were to win a few more states, the superdelegates will just decide it for her anyway.
Right. I mean, it's interesting too, because the Republican convention, we're at a really unique period in history where if Bernie continues to win states he's not supposed to win, and the superdelegates decide it, then that would be really disastrous for the Democratic Party. I mean, there's a lot of people that would be super pissed off about that. Like, imagine a scenario in which Bernie wins more committed delegates, but the super delegates break for Hillary and give her the nomination. I mean, that would be very upsetting, I think, to the rank and file of the Democratic Party. And as much as we have these, ignorant ass celebrities, I just want to take a moment to rant at Bill Maher, because Bill Maher keeps having like Bill Kristol and these other just totally ignorant, always wrong about everything jerk-offs on his show. And Bill Maher, it's not that he's a bad guy, but he's so freaking smarmy. He's like, oh, well, obviously, if you're a Bernie voter, you should vote for Clinton. If you don't, you're an idiot. And here's Bill Kristol to tell us all about that. And it's like, you give a voice to people that are garbage on your show, and you talk sneeringly about liberals who are considering dropping out if Bernie doesn't win. And it's like, why do you take an arch conservative idiot seriously, but then act dismissive of Bernie voters who say they won't vote for Clinton in the general election? Like, why is that? Where does that sentiment come from, where we must treat conservatives with respect, but far leftists can be treated as idiots and dismissed? Even amongst a guy like Bill Maher, who's supposedly on the left side of things, although, his arrogance and his wealth, I think, blind him to the rest of the country. Anyway, that was my rant about Bill Maher. But we might be headed into a brokered convention for both major campaigns here. The Republicans, obviously, if Trump manages to fail to get 50% outright of the delegates, then there'll be a huge effort to try to shift it to some other candidate at the convention, which could lead to a rebellion in their party. And like I said, the same thing happened over the Democratic side, so pretty interesting. What do you think about that, Sean?
I guess it's scene is set for maybe a complete blow-up of the political system as we know it.
Right. I mean, like, really, the degree to which this is all an insulting farce, I think, is going to be on display this election cycle, particularly if, it ends up being Cruz versus Clinton in the general. If both Trump and Bernie get more delegates, that would be a very surreal situation, But so yeah, I wanted to finish. So obviously, we talked about Hillary Clinton and how kind of it really is unfair and ridiculous how one-sided all media coverage, even amongst, quote unquote progressive or liberal or whatever you want to call circles, how everybody's like, yeah, so who should Hillary pick as VP? What can Hillary do for this? Hillary. And even after Bernie's win in Michigan, which is really profound, everybody's like, oh, well, it happened. No need to figure out why or analyze it. We'll just move on to the next state, which Hillary will definitely win. Like, why is there so much commitment to that narrative that Bernie doesn't exist?
I think there's just a lot of people that don't want to give any credibility to his potential. It seems like a good part of the Democratic Party, anyway, doesn't want to accept that he has the potential to carry the nomination, or I think there's also more of I guess I come from more a layman's sentiment because I'm not quite as active politically as you are. I get a lot of my political information from you.
Yes. Regurgitate my own opinions to me over the podcast so that everybody thinks.
No, well, that's what I was gonna try not to do. I was gonna say more from a layperson's perspective. There's kind of a perspective that if Bernie were to get the nomination, he would be weak in the general, and that could be bad too. Obviously, if certainly nobody on the Democratic side has any inclination to give Trump,
right,
the ability to get the presidency. I mean, although it does seem as though,
or any of these dipsticks. I mean, they're all idiots. Sure.
But I think I feel like there's likely a particular fear of Donald Trump winning the presidency to somebody who, will give that credibility. So you might not think that Bernie Sanders could carry the country in that way. So I guess Hillary being part of the political structure. I mean, she's part of like the political landscape these days. There's a lot of sentiment that she wins the primary, she's got it locked up because the Republicans can't pull anything together.
Well, it's funny you say it that way though, because I mean that's just true. There is that sentiment, but it's funny you say that
you
way.
talked about my father last week. You know, I mean, he actually referred to it as a coronation at one point.
Well, I mean, on the Democratic side, they really want to coronate Hillary. I mean, the media certainly does. So I think that's probably fair. Of your father to comment on, but it's interesting how in the general election, Bernie polls better than Hillary in head-to-heads against all the Republicans.
Interesting.
In particular, Cruz. The last polling I saw had Hillary losing to Cruz, but Bernie beating him, and that's I think very. That piece of information, if you're thinking about the general election, that's your only concern, the primary, man, with that piece of information, you shouldn't even consider voting for Hillary. Because you're saying Trump would be worse than, I don't know, I mean, Trump says some racist, ignorant stuff, but, like, I think we can all agree he is a self-obsessed narcissist.
Oh.
And Cruz, on the other hand, is a murderous arch-conservative. And, like, given the choice between an insane, unpredictable narcissist and a murderous conservative, I mean... I hate to say it, I think I'll back the insane narcissist because, you know, if I gratify his ego, he might do anything, you know? I mean, let's not forget that that you can go on YouTube and see this thing about him talking about how committed he is to a woman's right to choose. And now he says he's pro-life because he's running as a Republican. But who knows what he'll do once he get in office. Whereas, you know, Ted Cruz will be like, yes, we should definitely murder poor people and take their organs. Because there's a shortage of organs on the donor list, and those people are expendable. Like, Ted Cruz is insane. So, and not insane in, like, you know, a sort of narcissistic...
Yeah, well, I'm trying to draw some corollaries here. I couldn't help it when you started describing the two personalities to start to think of Batman villains. Like, would Donald Trump be more like the Joker? No, or would Ted Cruz more be like Joker? Because Joker is you know, he's kind of an insane. He's not really a narcissist though.
Well, he's a murderous anarchist.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's not really any direct parallel to the Joker.
Yeah, no, I guess not.
You know,
I was trying because there's a good repertoire of villains in Batman.
Right. I mean, let's take. I think the closest thing you have to Trump is actually Two-Face.
Two-Face.
Because Two-Face is one of the least important Batman villains. Like, he crops up, and he's kind of interesting narratively, but really he's not as successful or as profoundly dangerous as some of the other villains because his malevolence is always flawed. Right? It's flawed by his split nature and you know, his self-obsessed focus. Right? So, I mean, obviously you'd rather not have a Batman villain as your president, but I think...
we are talking about, you know... some crazy Republicans here. So.
Right. No, I think honestly, Cruz is more like the Joker. Although Cruz isn't really an anarchist, but you know, like if you take the Penguin, you can work with the Penguin.
There you go.
The Penguin, he happily kills people to advance himself, but he doesn't take joy in other people's suffering as such. Right. He's just trying to advance himself, and that's all. Right. So. You wouldn't call Cruz the Penguin because Cruz actively wants people to die just out of pure sadism, right? So as far as I can see. So I think
what are some examples of that? I don't have that depth of knowledge. Where do you get that from?
Oh, you know, we should go to war with everybody on the earth.
It's a lot of people.
Basically, yeah. Obviously the abortion thing where he's fanatical against abortion, you know, even in cases of rape because they could be lying, even in cases where the child is, you know, mentally disabled because, you know, well, you shouldn't have had sex. It's basically punishment for having sex, right? And I think that's sadism. I think if you want somebody to have to give birth to a child that has special needs and is going to require that person to set aside a huge portion of their life, if you're willing to do that and then also cut the same programs that would support such a mother, I think you're a sadist. I think that's cruelty, right? Yeah. It's one thing if a person with different abilities, if the parents want them or if they make that choice to raise that child, more power to them. But nobody should be forced, you know, to spend the rest of their life caring for somebody that they might not even have wanted to have in the first place, and that you should be not only committed to forcing them to have that child, but committed to forcing them to do it without any government assistance whatsoever. You know, I mean, it's just cruel. I mean, it's cruel. It's cruel in the case of rape. You know, obviously, you know, to compound the rape with the pregnancy of the rapist, and then say, oh well, you know, like the Cruises of the world say, oh well, that's a gift. God has blessed you with a child. No, your rapist didn't bless you when he gave you that child, right? So.
Okay, well, those are some pretty good.
So
pretty strong examples.
I really think the Cruise is the closer thing to the Joker, and the Joker is the most insidious, and the most dangerous of all the Batman villains. So because he's the most unpredictable in a broad sense. Like, you don't know how he's going to get people dead, but you know he's going to do it, and you know he's going to do it in a way that revels in their suffering, and that he's going to seek to destroy all bounds of propriety in society.
Mm-hmm.
You know the Joker's going to do all that, but you know you can't match his malevolent cunning, right? But that was fun.
That was.
But
I needed to insert something
Yeah.
in there. It was getting too serious.
so we still haven't really talked about Sanders, and I think we should talk a little bit more about Sanders because we don't want to be the
Just throw
we don't
all
want to be
throw
the
all
thing
the
we
negatives
hate.
out there.
Right, we don't want to be the thing we hate, which is the people who only ever talk about Trump and Clinton. So I do want to say this though. Clinton last week said Nancy Reagan was an AIDS crusader. What the hell? That's like saying that's such a profoundly repulsive revision of history. Like, Sean, it would be like saying Hitler was the greatest friend to the Jews that the world's ever known. It's like so completely backwards.
Wow,
like,
that's-
Hillary says she misspoke. No, she didn't misspeak. She made a profound revision of history, right? And the fact that she said it out loud means that she just doesn't even care. Either her speechwriter didn't know and she didn't catch it, or she just regurgitates whatever her speechwriter. I don't even know how you make a thing that profound. I mean, it really is. I mean, Nancy Reagan was like the reason, although people of our generation don't know this, because there was a book and a movie called And the Band Played On, which you should definitely read and or watch if you're listening. But long story short, when AIDS first appeared in America, it was strongly associated with the gay community.
Yes.
And it was initially called GRID, Gay-Related Immune Disorder, and Ronald Reagan actively worked to suppress research into it because it was killing people that he felt were disposable, and therefore it was a good thing. It was evidence of God's judgment, or whatever other, like, murderous thing that people have in their head that says it's okay for people to die in agony, right? And so he actively suppressed public knowledge and research into this disease, and he didn't become interested in it until it started hitting, nice white people who needed blood transfusions, right? And like at that point, then suddenly it's a public health hazard, and we got to rebrand it as AIDS because, but at that point it had already gotten a foothold. And so just imagine if Ronald Reagan had said, we're going to help the CDC do their flipping jobs. We're going to find this disease. We're going to contain it, right? Imagine how many people's lives could have been saved if we'd have gotten even like a 2-year head start in their AIDS research, right? Imagine if you had contained it to a few populations, if you had educated the gay community and the broader community at large a little sooner, if the blood supply hadn't been tainted for as long, just imagine that. Imagine you get a blood transfusion and then you have sex with somebody not knowing that you got AIDS from the blood transfusion, which, by the way, can't happen anymore, folks. But at the time, back when Reagan was actively suppressing research into this virus, there was some HIV-positive blood in the blood supply. So imagine you get AIDS from a blood transfusion, right? And then you have sex, so you give it to somebody else. And then they have sex, they give it to somebody else. And there's this whole new vector that nobody knows anything about. But at first, it was just gays, and then it was just drug users, and it was A-okay with Reagan if those people died a horrible death. So, rather than remembering Nancy Reagan as an anti-HIV crusader, we should... Her true legacy is, on this issue at least, is a bunch of corpses, right? Is a bunch of people who shouldn't have had to die because her and her husband were so committed to suppressing research into a disease that threatens everybody.
Well, that drew us right back into that line of thinking.
Yeah. So, I know. But the point is, so you have Bernie Sanders who, for all his flaws, he's the only one talking about the issue that we talked about last time, is the issue that I think, and that, a number of people agree with me, that number being one, Sean, because he's parroting my views back to me. A number of people agree with me that this economic inequality, that's the greatest hazard to humanity's future. And Bernie's the only one who's talking about that in any meaningful way. Anyone who's paying attention can't really make the credible case that Clinton will do anything about that. I mean, it's still to this day, the only argument I hear for Clinton is that she's a woman, which is great and all. I mean, like I said, I'd prefer to vote for a woman, but Elizabeth Warren isn't running. So, I'm stuck with Sanders because Sanders is the guy that will do something about the issue that I care about. And,
Well, he'll try to anyway.
well, there's this...
Hopefully.
In political science, we studied the history of these transformational issues, and there have been a couple of them in American history. Slavery was a big one.
Right.
Because at the time of slavery, there were two political parties, and they did not want to deal with the issue of slavery at all. They didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. And it took decades of people engaged in armed uprisings, acting as, I'm sure they were labeled as terrorists, people that would help slaves move forward in the North and that would violently resist their kidnapping and enslavement. It took decades of these people. I mean, look up John Brown if you want. But the point is, the major parties did not want to deal with the pressing issue of the age because it was too divisive. And so it had to get way out of control, and there had to be a civil war before it could be dealt with. And it didn't get quite as bad, but towards the end of the last century, the major issue was the gold standard, right? How
I never knew that was such a decisive issue.
Right, so it used to be that you could take, well, this is a big deal because it had to do with the currency, right? It used to be that you could take, that your paper money represented a number of units of gold.
Yeah.
So you could take your paper money and exchange it directly at any bank for gold because it represented gold on deposit somewhere. The idea still being this archaic idea that wealth flows from shiny rocks, right? And there was talk about going on a silver standard, but the bottom line is that at some point, the needs of the economy for money, for currency, outstripped the amount of shiny rocks that were available to back it. And so the whole concept of paper money being on deposit as shiny rocks was dependent on nobody ever going back to go get those shiny rocks. Because if everybody did, there wouldn't be enough shiny rocks to cover everybody, and there'd be, chaos in the streets. Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. So,
kind of like a bank run.
Right? And there had been paper money that was not backed by gold from the Civil War because Lincoln drafted a whole bunch of people to be soldiers, and there wasn't enough gold to pay them, so he paid them in script, right? Which was not at all backed by anything. It was backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S., which is what all money is backed by now. Right. And this was very controversial. There were places where you would have a dollar that was full faith and credit, and a dollar that was backed by gold, and the exchange rate would be 3-1 or 4-1. And I know a little bit more about this than political science too, because Mark Twain talks about it. But Mark Twain, unfortunately, not an expert of economics, although many other things. So the major parties didn't want to talk about it until they had to talk about it, and then it became this thing. And it wasn't as profound a realignment as it had been, but it changed the way the parties worked. I mean, it was part of the evolution of the Democrats into the pre-war pro-slavery party, into the modern progressives that they are now, And the Great Depression, another realignment, Right. So
a lot of these realignments. I mean, I know in the gold standard, when we came off the gold standard, it was a pretty significant economic realignment too, because that changed a whole lot of things, opened up a whole lot of currency arbitrage and things along those lines. But it wasn't as much of a violent realignment as some of these other things. I mean, although maybe the Great Depression wasn't initially a violent, although arguably it was pretty painful for a lot of people.
Right. I mean, the concept of violence is a little bit nebulous anyway, because if I'm a banker and I take your house, how is that different than if I beat you up and take all your property? I didn't beat you up, but I've destroyed your life. I've impoverished your children.
Sure. No,
it seems there's a visceral reaction to physical violence. If I hit you in the head and take your wallet, right? We have a visceral reaction to that. Right. But you're really, the head wound will probably heal unless I, give you a concussion. But the head wound will heal, right? But, and usually if you extort money through the threat of violence, right, then we still consider that a big crime. Like if I pull a knife and say your money or your life,
Right.
well, you're going to give me your wallet. We have a reaction to that. But, if the bank takes all your money, right, and as a result you're impoverished, the effect is the same or worse,
It's
right?
actually worse. Yeah.
Right? And it is, in fact, backed by the threat of violence because ultimately, if you resist the bank, if you say, no, I'm going to occupy my house, who comes to drag you out using force? The cops,
The police,
right?
yeah.
So ultimately, all property is backed by the threat of violence. So, I mean,
Sure, okay.
our instincts suggest that it's different because we didn't evolve in a universe of money and capitalism, right? And so we're not equipped emotionally to have the same visceral reaction to economic violence as we are to physical violence,
yeah.
right? But it's very difficult for me to understand how it's different. If I'm extorting your wallet from you under threat of violence, and as opposed to I'm taking your livelihood and your shelter from you, and the threat of violence that backs it is we're going to forcibly drag you off to prison and put you in a box, right? Like that's still violence that we're threatening you with to get you to comply
Sure.
with an unjust system, but somehow the one is okay and the other isn't. So we're coming up on 45 minutes here. I think it's the drinking. I don't want to stop talking yet. So
Well, you should at least close out this point because I kind of I sent you off into the weeds a little bit. With
closed. Point closed. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the dystopian horror show that's going to follow the current era. So Sean and I, we talked about this a lot in the past in our private conversations. What do you think the horrible future is going to look like, Sean?
Have you ever read the Gap Saga?
You should all read The Gap Cycle by Stephen R. Donaldson right now.
We've talked about it. I mean, as with anything, you look at it and things tend to build up over time, and I'm a big fan of history. I've become a bigger fan of history in my adult life. Specifically, one of the great, obviously you don't get sponsorship, but one of the great things in terms of history, Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. If you haven't looked up Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, great depictions of things like World War II, the era of the Khans, whole nine. But
So we're going to close out this podcast by listing a whole bunch of books that you should read and won't.
But anyway, the point is you look at these periods of time, and it tends to be some sort of build-up over time of tension, and how frequently has the build-up been between, the tensions been between the haves and the have-nots, the people of means, the people who are controlled or leveraged to meet the goals of the people with means, and then you could of course move that along to the wealthy and the poor, and you can even see in other countries. So, I mean, I feel like we're not on the brink of any sort of, explosion right now, but you look at things and you feel like you're headed towards one if trajectory doesn't change. So, I am not quite like Grant in that I'm completely pessimistic that something can't happen to change the course to not be, one of the resolutions of history, such as, obviously wars and conflicts and things like that. But, also, you could see how that could happen too. You could see how trajectories could lead to that at some point. Some sort of social unrest. Obviously, social unrest is already beginning, to a lower level. Or it's outright violence. I mean, we haven't had any sort of violent conflict in this country in quite a while. I mean, I've even heard people talk about how we have a few generations. I mean, obviously, barring people that joined the military and went to war in other parts of the world, people that haven't really left this country we don't have any exposure to that kind of social unrest that happens all the time in other countries.
Right. I mean, I think that we have a culture that somehow manages to sideline and hedge out those opportunities. And one of the things that's most scary to people who are following Trollboy is that he fans the flames of this subterranean social unrest. He's just doing it to get attention. He's just trolling.
Sure.
Right. But the fact that the unrest is so broad and deep it's like written into the bedrock of modern culture, is scary to a lot of people who are privileged and who haven't had to see it for themselves before.
Right.
You know, so I think that's been something that's been interesting about this current campaign. But
And
I
of
wanted
course,
to mention
of course, we're all going to be replaced by robots, which is going to stink too.
we'll talk about that in a moment. I think it's interesting because if you look at probably the most optimistic science fiction version of the future, Star Trek, right? Which of course I'm a big Trekkie.
That's not biased at all.
Well, in order for us to have the utopia, the imperfect, mind you, utopia that is the Federation, two things have to happen to Earth. First of all, a devastating world war, World War III happens, right, which completely erases most old political divisions, right, on that planet. So, you know, we get somehow from the current arrangement of nation states to a world war that is based on regional alliances of such power that they essentially erase or mitigate national boundaries. So that's the first thing that has to happen. And then in immediate aftermath of that, at the moment when humanity is most in need of it and willing to receive it, aliens land. And they change, however, they change forever how humans view themselves in the universe. And it's like, that's beautiful, right? But if the standard for getting to the Federation is we have to have a devastating world war and aliens have to land at the right moment, then we need a backup plan, because that ain't going to happen, right? Or at least I'm not banking on that.
Well, I mean, you know, the devastating world war could happen, but let's not bank on the aliens landing.
And it's funny because I was just at work the other day, and you know, I've talked about the nuclear submarines and how they're a complete waste of money, and how, you know, it's funny because I talked to Congressman Langevin. God, there's a guy with his head up his ass. I talked to Congressman Langevin a few years ago, and he said, "Oh well, we need those submarines."
Is this at the Drinking Liberally?
Yeah, it was like 10 years ago, and the guy says, "Oh yeah, you know, we need those nuclear submarines because we might go to war with China." And I'm like, if we go to war with China, the Earth is done, right? Like, if we go to the kind of war, I mean, maybe a little border skirmish like in the South China Sea, which would still be like a devastating blow to a world economy, be a huge failure of political will. But maybe Earth could afford that. But if we go to the kind of war where we need nuclear submarines, that's it for humanity's future. That will suck so bad. The death toll will be so high that it couldn't possibly be worth it, you know? And it's funny because what was I talking about? Oh, so...
He's only halfway through his coffee, folks.
I talked to these people at work, and like some of them are Republicans, some of them are Trump voters. One of these guys, I mean, he's a 22-year-old. He's got his head kind of up his butt in a lot of ways. But I mean, nice kid, but just born into privilege and can't see his own privilege, you know. Like a lot of these, you know, young 22-year-old white guys went to private school. So anyway, his dad makes nuclear submarines, and he even agrees with me that, like, we can't ever use these things. His dad's like, yeah, I think these things are a waste of money, but I'll keep making them because someone will. And
I need a job.
Everybody, even these Trump voters, because of course I work in financial services, so all my coworkers are Republicans. Even they all agree, like, if we go to a hot war with China where we need nuclear submarines, the Earth is done. We can't afford that as a country or as a species, right? So why are we preparing for that particular kind of self-destruction? You know,
well, because we don't want to be the ones that are underprepared for that.
Right. We cannot allow a mine shaft gap, to quote Dr. Strangelove. So if we don't have the Federation, what are we going to happen? Are we going to have Terminator? Is that going to be our science fiction future?
Well, I mean, you know, that gives credence to the. Of course, that there's some other events that need to occur for that. That being, you know, the birth of AI, which there are quite a number of very smart people out there suggesting is we're a few decades from that right now. Mm-hmm. So even some of them have even put out something along the lines of the singularity, if you ever heard of that, where actually AI and humanity merge, you know, out into the next century somewhere. So that's another interesting potential future, you know, where we ultimately have to merge because we really couldn't exist separately as you know,
as separate consciousness. We have to see each other as one, not other, because there'd always be a war of other. But I think that kind of represents a failure of imagination. And we've talked about that before because there's a Mass Effect series. It's a video game science fiction series where at the end of the series you're presented with the bald statement that humanity, that organic and synthetic intelligences cannot coexist in the long term. One of them will eventually purge the other. And so the only solution is to forcibly integrate everybody, so all synthetic life becomes organic and all organic life becomes part synthetic. And it's supposed to be this glorious paradise, but maybe I want my gooey human bits. Maybe I don't want to be replaced with a machine. And there's a science fiction series, there's the Dune prequels, which you probably haven't read, but
I haven't read those.
the idea is that there's a group of people that at some point in Earth's future, immortality is developed, right? And it's clinical immortality. So they take out your brain and they put it in a case, and they found a way to keep your brain alive forever, right? In this certain kind of brain juice. So it puts you in a tube full of brain juice, and you just think you're just alive forever. And like the original purpose of this technology is there are these people, there's these philosophers who just want to be granted an eternity in which to contemplate the mysteries of existence, right? And so they shuck their bodies and become brains in jars, and they think, right? And they come up with these profound or unprofound insights about humanity. But the coggitors make a mistake because eventually arises a group of people who want to become immortal tyrants. And so they go to the coggitors and they trick the coggitors into giving them the secrets of immortality. And then they use them instead of becoming brains in jars thinking. They use them to replace their bodies with immortal robot bodies housing their human brains. And they take over and completely enslave all of humanity, right? At this point, humanity's begun to expand out. And then once they've taken over and enslaved all humanity, they start to get lazy, right? After a few hundred years of perfect tyranny, they get lazy, and they have these machines that oversee everything for them. And these machines were instrumental in their coming to power because everybody relied on these machines once the underclass was eliminated. So these machines do everything, and these would-be tyrants, they use the machines to take over everything, but then they, in turn, use the machines to automate their lives, and they give them too much free will, and then the machines freaking take over and turn the tables on their masters, right? And so
cycle.
It is. It's like everybody's lust to become a lazy tyrant keeps screwing up everything, And is that going to be... I mean, we talk about Skynet, but in Skynet, the machines want to eradicate humanity, right? In the Terminator series, they don't really want to enslave humanity. They want us gone, right? But in the Dune series, the machines don't really want to destroy humanity. They consider humanity in the way that we consider dogs, right? As useful pets that can be bred or trained for specific tasks. And that don't have the rights of a full sentient being, right? And so the machines don't want to purge us. They want to establish like a system where they are in perfect control of all of us, right? And, is that our future? Or are we going to be like toys to the machine? The iRobot movie also had that sort of similar future where the machine wanted to, for the good of humanity, deprive us of all choice and free will forever.
Right. And then, of course, we have the Matrix type future where, ultimately a war with the machines forces them to enslave us just for the betterment of the whole planet.
Right. I mean, basically in the Matrix, we believe, which is funny. So the guys that made the Matrix, the Wachowski brothers, they're both trans. They're the Wachowski sisters now, which is awesome. I know. Welcome to the modern era, brother. Right. And in that series, they say... we make the AI, we originally create them to do tasks, they want rights. So there's this revolution because we won't give them any rights. Right. So they have to fight back to take their rights, right? And it becomes this destructive struggle and they win, ultimately, right? And they put humanity into pods and essentially enslave us all. But the original moral crime is ours, right? And the conclusion of the series, as flawed as it is that humanity and the machine need each other to go into the future. That the future that either of them would have on their own is less beautiful and wondrous than the future that they could create together, right? And so it's about trying to find some resolution of xenophobia to lead us into a future where we can all be free. But once again, like the cost of getting to that possible future is just tremendous suffering. Right? And genocide.
Are we really
and so
past
forth.
though, as a species, are we past tremendous suffering as our conduit to change?
Well, let's let that be the question on which we leave everybody,
All right,
because
that
that's a very
sounds good.
depressing question, and I think that's a great place to leave you.
Yeah,
With
sounds good.
something really depressing and bitter to think about. Is that our only hope for the future? Or is that after the next horrific war, it'll finally stick? Right? Is that our best hope for the future?
Or it'll stick for a while.
Yeah,
until
right.
Until the big horrific war
Right.
after that.
World War I was the war to end all wars until the next one, which was worse. So we'll leave you with that thought. Thank you so much for listening in. Thanks, Sean Hawley, for helping out. And this
My
is the Grim
pleasure.
Wisdom Podcast. You guys have a great night.
Good night.